The only thing I can control is me. Instead of worrying about who else is causing you problems, worry about what you can do to yourself to improve your station. And if you go down that path, you're going to find you have a lot more control than you think you do.
So here we are on the Sunday special with Jocko Willink, who's the host of the Jocko podcast and the author of this fine book, The Dichotomy of Leadership, which is soon to be on the New York Times bestseller list. I'm sure we'll get to everything involving leadership and the military and all that kind of good stuff. But first, let's talk about your job recruitment. So there are job sites that send you tons of the wrong resumes to sort through, and that is not smart. But you know what is smart? Going to ZipRecruiter.com/Ben Guest to hire the right person. ZipRecruiter doesn't depend on candidates finding you. It finds them for you. They have powerful matching technology, scanning thousands of resumes, identifying people with the right skills, education, and experience for your job, and actively inviting them to apply so you get qualified candidates fast. And that's why ZipRecruiter is rated #1 by employers in the United States. That rating comes from hiring sites on Trustpilot with over 1,000 reviews. Right now, my listeners can try ZipRecruiter for free at this exclusive web address, ZipRecruiter.com/Ben Guest, because I have a guest. That's ZipRecruiter.com/Ben Guest, ZipRecruiter.com/Ben Guest. And obviously, look, when we have to hire here, when we have to get rid of some of our producers for just falling asleep on the job and being terrible at their jobs, they all know they're on notice. ZipRecruiter.com/Ben Guest is the way that we actually replace them. So sorry for the notice, guys, but that's how it works. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire, ZipRecruiter.com/Ben Guest. But Jocko, thanks so much for stopping by. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it too.
For folks who don't know what you do, you are a leadership guru. You're a leadership guru in the area of business and in the area of just general leadership. And all that started with your military background. So can you kind of get me the story from how you went from a kid to a guy who's speaking for large sums of money before leadership groups?
Well, first of all, guru is a strong word. So let's put that one in check right out of the gate. I was raised in a small New England town, grew up on a dirt road. Both my parents were school teachers, and I was a pretty rebellious young kid. And one of the rebellious things that caught my eye pretty early on was joining the military, because where I was from, not too many people join the military. And then when you're going to go and join the military because you want to rebel, you might as well just go and do something even more extreme than just join the military. And I figured out what the SEAL teams were when I was a young kid. And I like I said, I always wanted to be some kind of commando. And so when I got out of high school, I enlisted in the Navy. I ended up at SEAL Team 1. Went through the SEAL team training and then ended up at SEAL Team 1. And that was before the first Gulf War. I actually missed the first Gulf War because I was going through the SEAL training and got to a SEAL team. And once I was there, I did what SEALs do, which is train all the time. Eventually got picked up for a leadership program, became a SEAL officer, and then did deployments until September 11th. Once September 11th came, then I started doing the wartime deployments. I deployed twice to Iraq. Once as a SEAL platoon commander, once as what's called a SEAL task unit commander, which means there's 2 SEAL platoons working together, and I was in charge of both of them. And when I got done with that deployment, that was a very arduous deployment. We were in the Battle of Ramadi in 2006. It was very hard fighting. The Marines and soldiers that we worked alongside took heavy losses, but did an incredible job. We took casualties in our task unit. It was very hard fighting. And when I came home from that deployment, I got asked basically, well, okay, Jocko, what do you want to do now? And I ended up taking over the training for the West Coast SEAL teams. And this isn't the training where you see people on TV going through SEAL training where you carry the boats around or you do a bunch of push-ups. This isn't that training. That's our basic training. The training that I ran was the training where you learn to shoot, move, and communicate as a SEAL platoon, and where we actually taught combat leadership. And so I took over that training. I ran that for the last few years. And when I was getting ready to retire, a guy that I knew was a friend of mine. He was the CEO of a company. And he said, hey, can you come and talk to my executives, about combat leadership? And I said, sure, I'll do it. He's a friend of mine. So I went and did it. And I don't know what he thought I was going to talk about. But when I got done, he came up to me and said, I want you to do this for every division that I have in my company. And I said, well, I'm retiring and I don't know. And he said, I'll give you money. and I said, how much? And we worked it out. And I ended up talking to every division that he had in his company. And at one of those divisional meetings, the CEO of the parent company was there. And when I got done, briefing about leadership, that CEO came up to me and said, hey, I want you to talk to the CEOs of all my companies. And, he owned 45 or 50 companies. And from there, I went and talked to those CEOs. And the next thing you know, I had a new job, and I didn't get to retire like I had planned. And as I was doing that, I needed some backup. And one of the guys that worked for me in the Battle of Ramadi, a guy by the name of Leif Babin, he was one of the platoon commanders underneath me in those 2 SEAL platoons. And he was getting out of the Navy. And I talked to him and said, hey, man, I need some backup over here. And so we joined forces and we formed this company, Echelon Front, and that's what we do, leadership consulting. And along the way, as we would talk to these companies, we'd get done talking and they'd say, oh, do you have this stuff written down anywhere? Do you have any, pamphlets you can give us so the guys that missed the meeting can see what you talked about? And so eventually we looked at each other and said, okay, we need to write this stuff down in a more formal way. We did that. That became a manuscript. That manuscript became a book. And that book was the first book we released. It was called Extreme Ownership. And it ended up, I kind of thought I'd be giving it away at the back of I'd speak to people and give it away in the back. And it ended up doing really well and getting a lot of traction. And just, it's been well read.
So how much of your leadership do you think is just natural to you? Because you're talking about what I'm hearing is obviously a guy who has tremendous initiative from a very young age. I mean, to even be from a place where nobody goes into the military and just join the military takes a lot of chutzpah, as my folks would say. So do you think that it really is that leadership is born or is it bred?
Yeah, I get asked this question all the time. And so it's both. It's absolutely both. And you as a human being are going to get certain characteristics that are going to make you a good leader, and you're going to lack some characteristics that would make you a good leader if you had them. You don't get 10s across the board. It's like the little video games you see kids play where you get a 9 in strength and a 7 in intellect and an 8 in dexterity. And you get those too as a leader. And you don't get all 10s. So some leadership characteristics that make you a good leader, for instance, obviously it's good to be articulate. If you can express your message clearly to people, that's going to help you from a leadership perspective. If you have some natural charisma, that's going to help you from a leadership perspective. If you can look at complex problems and you can simplify them, that's going to be helpful as a leader because that's what you're doing. So if you're persuasive, there's all kinds of things that will help you as a leader, and you're not going to be good at all of them. And so as a leader, if you look at the ones that you're weak at, you can improve them. That's what's beneficial. So you can't take someone that's just a horrible leader and make them into an amazing leader, but you can take someone that's a decent leader and you can make them into a very good or even an exceptional leader because you can definitely get more articulate. You can definitely get more comfortable speaking to people. You can definitely get more precise at taking very complex problems and simplifying them so that your team can understand what it is that needs to get done. So these are all things that you can improve upon. And I always have to close this out by saying that there are some people that cannot become better leaders. And the people that cannot become better leaders are the people that can't put their ego in check. They lack humility. And those people, they think they're doing everything great. So they're not going to improve as leaders. You can't coach them. You can't convince them. They think they're perfect. And they're going to stay where they are from a leadership perspective.
So what did you actually learn from the first time you went through SEAL training? Because you joined the military and you decided to go to the hardest, what everybody widely across America knows is the hardest training program in America. What is that like?
The myth about SEAL training, that part of SEAL training, is that you learn anything at all. Because you actually don't. You learn some things, but it's a screening process. What they're trying to do is get rid of people that don't want to really, really, really do that job. So it's suffering. You're going to be wet, you're going to be cold, you're going to be tired, and you're going to be that for extended periods of time. And there's an 80% attrition rate. But when you make it through, you get to a SEAL team. And when you get to a SEAL team, that's when you start to actually learn about being a SEAL. That's when you learn the tactics and the leadership perspective. That's when you start to become an actual SEAL. Getting through the basic SEAL training, when you show up at a SEAL team, everyone looks at you. You come out of there thinking you just said, I just went through the toughest training in the world. You get to a SEAL team. I literally checked in with the Master Chief and he said, everyone here has been through that training. No one cares. So it's very humbling when you show up. And that's when you start to learn. You start to learn when you get in a SEAL platoon.
And when it comes to getting into the SEAL platoon, how do you determine leadership positions even among people who you're initially equals with? Do you think that sort of naturally falls out, or?
There's a rank structure inside the military. There's a rank structure inside the SEAL teams, and you're going to be when you're a new guy, you're going to be the junior guy. And then the next platoon, you're going to be a little bit more senior. You'll have a couple guys working for you. The platoon chief is going to be, the senior guy, enlisted guy. inside of a SEAL platoon, and then you'll have an officer in charge of the whole thing. And those are pre-designated. Which was very counter to my initial thought when I joined the Navy. My dad told me I was going to hate it because I said, why do you think I'm going to hate it? He goes, because you don't like to listen to anybody and you don't like authority. And of course I told him, no, Dad, it's a team. We don't have to listen to anybody. It's a team. And I was completely wrong because there is a rank structure and you absolutely, it's the military. Even though it's a team and you definitely you build relationships throughout that chain of command, and that is more prominent than in some other groups, but there's a chain of command and you're going to follow that chain of command. And
there's been a lot of talk about the possibility of mandatory national service. As somebody who's gone through this program, and I've seen so many guys who are military, some of whom I knew, back when they were in high school and were kind of, I can't say the words on air, but they were kind of F-ups. And then they come out the other end and they're, solid citizens, not only solid citizens, but really making something of themselves. What do you think of the idea of mandatory national service?
I love the idea of it, but at the same time, as an American, I don't like the idea of mandating that people do something that they don't want to do. And I think the volunteer military that we have right now it might be the best in the history of the world. We have a great military. And I think to mandate it, I think is problematic. That being said, every single person that I talk to, especially kids that are the age of 13, 14, 15, if you get the opportunity to join the military, then I would definitely recommend it because, like you said, it teaches you a lot of things.
When it comes to the application of leadership principles, how much of what you learned in leadership training at the SEALs was applicable, and how much of it was you're just in a situation and now you got to move, you got to figure something out? How much of it is seat of your pants kind of stuff?
Well, when I came in, we really didn't, and this is shocking, we really didn't have a process of leadership training that the leaders went through. And the leaders would learn OJT, on-the-job training. You'd watch the person that was leading you, and then when it was your time to take over, you'd kind of emulate what they were doing. And if you had a great leader, that worked okay. If you had a bad leader, that was a real problem. And so when I came back from that deployment to Ramadi, that's one of the things I focused on is I realized that we really needed to implement leadership training for the guys because you're on the battlefield. Leadership is the most important thing on the battlefield. And if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to get people killed without question. And
what would sort of can you give me a couple of stories to sort of demonstrate that point? I mean, what's a high point of leadership that you've seen on the battlefield as opposed to a low point that you've seen in terms of leadership?
Well, one thing that's important to clarify here is when I talk about leadership, I'm not just talking about me because I was in charge of the task unit or the platoon commander because he was in charge of the platoon or even the people above me. I'm talking about every level of leadership, every person taking ownership of their piece of the mission and executing with authority and executing with real passion about what they're doing. And so you got to have leadership at every level. And when you don't have that, it's very problematic. So what was great for me when I came back and I took over the training for the West Coast SEAL teams, I got to see, we put on the most realistic combat training, extremely stressful, very realistic. And I would get to see a platoon go through this training. And then the next night, it'd be another platoon going through the same scenarios. And then the next night, it'd be another platoon going through the same scenarios. So it was basically the most incredible leadership laboratory. It might be the most incredible leadership laboratory that's ever existed. It was that awesome to be able to put these platoons through this iterative training. And that was where it became very clear that leadership, if you had a good leader in a SEAL platoon, that SEAL platoon would do a good job. And by the way, that leader didn't need to be the senior guy. It could have been a guy that was 2 or 3 rungs down, but when things started happening, he would step up and take command and make things happen. And as long as the other leaders, maybe that were senior to them, had the wherewithal to say, you know what, this guy seems to have a grip on the situation, I'm going to let him run with it. Then it'd be okay. Occasionally you'd get an egotistical leader that would feel like, oh, you're stepping on my toes, and they'd try and put him down, and that would be problematic. But you'd see a good, solid leader anywhere in that SEAL platoon would make those SEAL platoons perform great. And if you had a bad leader in a SEAL platoon, you'd watch the whole platoon fall apart if no one stepped up and took charge and made things happen. This was very evident, and that's another thing that just solidified the principles that it's the same principles that we teach to businesses are literally the exact same principles that we wrote about in Extreme Ownership are the same principles that we taught to the young SEAL leaders coming up.
Well, I'm going to ask you in a second, what are some of those leadership principles? And we'll actually get into the sort of nitty-gritty from the 30,000-foot level. But first, let's talk about your impending death. So, life insurance, very important, but 1/3 of people don't have it. And that's because it's kind of hard to buy. You have to work out what you need and then do the research to find the best quote. And hopefully you don't get swindled along the way. It's not really a good way to shop for anything. So Policy Genius has made the whole process a lot simpler. Policy Genius compares quotes from